sewer systems, a lot of it began in England back during the time of the plague, when people were dumping sewage out of their window onto the street and it ran down the gutter. Obviously there was much sickness and disease which came as a result of that. And they gradually realized that it wasn't so much disease per se, it was caused by the sewage that was around. Vancouver began as a mill town built around Burrard Inlet, and the first sewers began shortly after the city was incorporated in ditches running down the street into the inlet. Of course, people had a problem with that, and they began to plank over the ditches, and they began to pipe the ditches, and that's how our first sewer system began.
The original problems would have been more of a sanitary nature, where yes, it ended up with cesspools in the street, and certainly sewage running down what they had in the way of rudimentary streets at that time, and eventually into creeks, streams, and ultimately into English Bay and False Creek areas.
We're standing here at the north foot of Balaclava Street where it meets English Bay. And behind me here we see the structure that was built in 1912. It looks like a dam spillway, and in fact that's pretty well what it is. When the outfall, which discharges about half a mile north of me here into the English Bay, overflows and there's a major storm occurring, this extra capacity is built into the system to provide for the sewage to come out of the top, down the spillway, and onto the beach. Now, thankfully, this does not happen very often, and when the original system was built in 1912, they weren't really too sure of the flows that we would be experiencing in Vancouver, and it does not overflow very often, but it is there as an emergency valve to prevent people from being flooded out upstream. This heritage document is the only known surviving copy of the 1913 Lee Report, which laid out the plan for the sewer system in Vancouver. It took roughly 30 or 40 years to implement fully the recommendations that Mr. Lee had made. In the early 1950s, with the growth of Vancouver and the development occurring, another report was commissioned by the Joint Sewerage Board, and that contemplated and looked at how we would implement our first sewage treatment system.
The second report was the Ron Report, which was commissioned in the early 50s and completed by the mid-50s. And out of that came the Greater Vancouver Sewage and Drainage Act, which is the act that we still function under, and it's our mandate. And that really set the framework for the sewer development in the region. It was more of an expansion of approach and looking at the system more holistically. Again, the municipalities had developed things somewhat in isolation. We did have the one joint board that looked at things a little bit more globally, but it tried to tie the entire region to a standard that said that these were best practices that we should embrace as the community developed.
When a person flushes their toilet in Vancouver, it generally flows downhill towards either the Fraser River or the ocean, depending on which side of the Burrard Peninsula you are on. On the north side, for example, it would flow north, down the hill into the English Bay Interceptor or the 8th Avenue Interceptor, which runs across the base of the hill, the ocean if you will, west towards UBC to Highbury Street, almost at UBC, at which point it flows in a deep tunnel under the peninsula to the Fraser River, where it proceeds under the Fraser River through some siphons we have and into the Iona sewage treatment plant. At the Iona plant, it is pumped up through the treatment works. Once it's finished that, it's pumped again to be discharged through the deep sea outfall into the Straits of Georgia.
Total volume that we treat on a normal day through the facilities is about 900 million liters in any given day. And that's done through roughly $12 billion worth of pipelines between municipalities and the GVRD's asset.
Vancouver is a very dynamic system. We're replacing 1% of the system annually, such that over a 100-year life cycle of our estimated pipes, their actual life, we will have a completely rejuvenated system. And we're always building and looking at 100 years in the capacity of the system. So right now we're replacing pipes that were constructed 1910, 1920. And they are under capacity for their present use, and we are building pipes which we hope will be good for the next 100 years at least.
as we talked about, the Ron report was really our guiding light to this point. A liquid waste management plan has recently been developed, which is looking at our next 50 years or so, and that's really become our roadmap, if you will, as far as what sorts of development will take place and what criteria will be used for any development that comes along.
Over the last 100 years, Vancouver's sewer system has evolved greatly from basically taking away sewage from people's houses to prevent health issues, to taking away stormwater sewage to prevent flooding, all the way to today where we're providing sewage treatment, we're looking after the environment, and we are moving to a much higher level of care of the environment, and at the same time providing the basic sewer services that are required to maintain a city.